Well, thanks for staying. We're going to take you right back to the very first album we ever put out, called Strawbs, and back to the very first track on that album. It's called The Man Who Called Himself Jesus. Into the shop, looked me straight between the eyes, and he said, you know, I'm Jesus. And I must have looked surprised, because he said, please don't be hasty, and no one understands, but I've got a way to prove it. And he lifted up his hands. He was the man who called himself Jesus. For a minute I was speechless. Then I looked into his face with sufficient light of sadness for the total human race. And I said, you must be joking. But he slowly shook his head, and he said, that's what they all say. I might as well be dead. He was the man who called himself Jesus. He asked me if I knew a place where he could start to preach, and I said, well, try a church, or maybe Brighton Beach. And I was trying to be serious, but he didn't seem impressed. He said, you think I'm crazy, you're just like all the rest. He was the man who called himself Jesus. I was really quite embarrassed. He was looking so sincere. So I said, I close the shop soon, won't you come and have a beer? And he asked me if I meant it, and he gave a funny smile, and he said he'd rather like that, and he hung around a while. He was a man who called himself Jesus. On the way he stopped to pat little children's heads and taught them one-line prayers to say when they went up to their beds. But mostly they were frightened, and they looked at him wide-eyed. And when he said, here's the name of Jesus, one girl even cried. He was a man who called himself Jesus. In the pub I asked him if he tried to see the Pope, and he said, although he thought about it, there was really not a hope. Then he said he thought he'd better go. He had some work to do. He said he'd come and see me in about a week or two. He was the man who called himself Jesus. After he had gone, I thought of what he'd said, and all his funny actions kept on running through my head. And when I felt my mind was drowning in a sea of mud, it seemed he'd find a beer and turn into a pint of blood. He was the man who called himself Jesus. He was the man who called himself Jesus. Thank you very much. I promise you that we were going to bring on a special guest. And he's flown in all the way from New York. Will you welcome John Ford?